So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Bethann from the Virginia Department of Ed. Bethann and I have worked together since, I don't know, probably 2003. And Virginia has always been on the leading edge of how they approach data systems, the collection, the data use. She's always been very creative in the face of very tough resources, you know, limited staff, certainly limited money because it's a state agency. And Virginia's had some pretty tough state statutes around data sharing and data use. I mean, for years, I don't know if it's still the case, but for years they had a state statute that prevented K-12 from sharing data with higher ed. Well, there goes our whole P20 concept, you know. But they have worked together tirelessly to come up with some very creative solutions around this. So I wanted to bring Bethann in to kind of highlight some of the things that she's learned, the processes that she's gone about, and then specifically the creative ways that they have tackled using and sharing data.
Thank you, Nancy. I'll have to say that it's easy to be creative when you can retire at any time. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to thank both RELs for sponsoring this event and for the opportunity to tell you Virginia's story today. And I hope everyone finds the information useful. It's really been 12 years that states have been working on meeting the requirements of NCLB and the 10 essential elements of the data quality campaign. Then the SLDS grant program came around and drove us to do even more. And then along came ARA with its data requirements. So what that ended up with, meeting all those requirements and all that accountability, gave us this huge set of really rich data. So in my office, we've worked really hard these past 12 years to collect and report the data, and we want to see it used in ways that can inform people, inform policies and practices to improve student achievement. And there's interest across the country in linking data across entities into higher ed and the workforce, and even on the other end of the spectrum, linking to early childhood systems. There's increased interest from the public and an increasing call for state agencies to be more transparent. So with all of this interest, how can we move forward with data use? The Data Quality Campaign defines 6 types of reports that can be developed with longitudinal data. Growth reports look at changes in a given student's achievement over time. The diagnostic reports provide academic histories of students' mastery of specific concepts and skills. We have early warning reports that Nancy mentioned to identify students who need help based on a number of risk indicators. Predictive reports showing the relationship between earlier and later student outcomes, such as high school performance and enrollment and persistence in college. Cohort reports that use data such as your cohort graduation or dropout rates that show information on the same group of students over time. And then finally, feedback reports providing information on students after they graduate. So we think we can use some of our longitudinal data to redirect educator time back into the classroom. We have longitudinal histories that can help teachers understand a student's performance in the past and target areas where the students may need help. And I've heard stories from teachers of all kinds of paper on the dining room table trying to piece together a given student's longitudinal history, and we can provide that information. Electronic transcripts improve the security of the transcript and reduce a huge paperwork burden at the school. And then student record exchanges. They can help us place a student in the right courses when he or she transfers into our school. And then there's instructional improvement systems. And they support the entire cycle of instruction. They have instructional tools, they have assessments, they have analysis tools, intervention strategies, and more. But all of this requires standards and interoperability for systems to communicate with one another. We hear all the time about complaints from teachers who have to log into multiple systems. In Virginia, we use the SIS standards, and we pay for our school district's licenses so that their systems can interoperate. So who's interested in our data? There are a lot of groups that are interested in our data. We have educators, students and parents, researchers, software developers and entrepreneurs, and of course the public pressing for increased transparency. So we're reaching out to educators right now. We're conducting a statewide needs assessment to determine how we can support our school districts around use of data. And some of our findings are that educators need and want ongoing professional development around analyzing and using data. They want real-time data. They don't want to see the results of an assessment 2 weeks later. They want single sign-on. They want to have customizable dashboards. And most of all, importantly, they want time for data analysis. Now, I'm not saying that SLDS is the source for all of this data. It can't possibly be. Much of it is local data. But this is what we're seeing in Virginia. Students and parents. I'm excited about the U.S. Department of Education's My Data initiative. The My Data button can be placed on a parent or student portal, and it can be used to download a student's longitudinal history. It's already available in PowerSchool. We had a very clever student in Henrico County, Virginia, who developed an iPhone app that logs onto his county's parent portal and downloads the grades, the attendance, alerts for closings and delays. And although the portal itself is accessible from the web, this makes the app on the iPhone consolidates all the data and makes it easier to see. And you can look up that app in the App Store. So in this way, we are using data to build connections between schools and students and families. Okay, researchers. Researchers want more data than we have, but I think that they also want a relationship with state agencies. Now, some states have very well-established research alliances. We don't. We find that state agencies and research organizations are very, very different. We have different cultures. We operate in different political environments, and we have differing senses of urgency. We worked with Virginia Commonwealth University and the University of Virginia just recently, and they completed a report called Bridging the Data Divide. It explores the differences that we have and makes recommendations for developing relationships, building trust, building a shared vision, and developing effective collaboration through that communication and trust. Next month, we are planning a one-day meeting with researchers and state agency staff to explore the topics in more detail. We've also developed a researcher's guide to using VLDS, that's the Virginia Longitudinal Data System. It gives researchers information on subtleties of the data that they may not understand just looking at it. Data values that have changed over time, data structures that change, just so they can avoid mistakes and pitfalls when they're using the data. And those are live links on the slide there, so when you get this slide deck, you can click on them and go directly to those documents. Some of our current research projects using longitudinal data, we're evaluating the impact of online instruction on students with disabilities. We're evaluating career and technical students' outcomes after graduation using K-12, post-secondary, and wage data. We're studying college and career readiness, and we're evaluating the impact of a GED program on GED student employment. And we've also engaged developers, software developers, and entrepreneurs in our effort to make data available to more sources. They wanted to create apps that they can sell. and they are looking to merge data from disparate sources to create mashups. And a mashup is a web application that takes data from multiple sources and presents it in new and informative ways. And they need data that they understand. It's very important to provide metadata so developers can use the data properly. So, how do we harness all of this interest in data to improve education? Well, first things first. We need to establish a very strong governance program around the use of data. You've got resource constraints, so you need to agree on key policy questions that would be answered with the data and set agreed upon priorities. And you need to establish processes around access to the data and use of the data. In Virginia, our research agenda consists of only 4 key questions. They're very broad. How can Virginia improve high school graduation rates while increasing students' preparation for college and careers? How can Virginia improve the preparation, recruitment, and retention of Virginia's educational personnel, including their meaningful and ongoing professional development, especially in teacher shortage areas and hard-to-staff schools? How can Virginia improve performance of the public workforce system? And by what means can Virginia's public workforce development system meet the needs of job seekers and workers and employees? So those are the key questions that we use to guide research that's done with our longitudinal data. So I mentioned processes. Once you've agreed on your policy questions and your priorities, it helps you select those projects that are going to meet your needs and your resource constraints. You need to establish boards and committees to review proposed projects and project deliverables at intermediate and final points in the study. You really need to work with your Attorney General to develop data use agreements or legal agreements that provide specifics on the project, including how the data will be used, who will use the data, what statistical methods will be used, how the data will be secured, and then when it will be destroyed. And then you should also consider who will retain intellectual property rights. So most states are now working in multi-agency environments. Governance in this world can be very tricky. It can take a long time. You can spend as much time on governance as you do building a system, or even more. It took 18 months for our governance program to get off the ground. And governance doesn't end. It's ongoing. We still meet monthly. And then when working with other agencies, there's not always immediate buy-in. In Virginia, we were very fortunate. The initial 4 agencies were all involved in writing a federal grant that supports the system we've built. As we move forward to add members from early childhood agencies, it's become a little bit more difficult. They're a little bit more scattered out there. And we've had to search for a champion in those agencies who really understands the value of the shared data and commit their agency. Our discussions now have raised themselves up to the agency head and secretariat level. Another thing to consider is how you'll make decisions as a group of agencies. As we developed our governance program, it was really helpful to have a neutral third party who facilitated our meetings. And it also is very helpful to give each agency one vote on all matters, so no one agency was in charge. We adopted a consensus model for making decisions. We call it, can you live with it? And that's because we understand we can't always get everything we want, but maybe we can live with something. Your model might be centralized, where agencies supply data to a single database or data warehouse, or it might be federated. In Virginia, we developed a federated model because, as Nancy said, Virginia law will not allow us to combine data from multiple agencies in a single warehouse. We actually have a third party merge our data for us so that we're never involved in merging the data, identifiable data. There are distinct advantages to each different kind of model. but I'm very happy with what we've done. It respects our agency's different cultures. It allows us to continue with our own internal data governance. It ignores conflicting agendas, and it respects agency autonomy. It doesn't require agencies to make significant changes to their data programs. So now that we've got governance in place, it's time to turn the data loose. But we don't have a lot of money, and how do we get others to do our work for free or for nearly free? We have some university partners for conducting research projects. I mentioned VCU and UVA earlier. That's a partnership that's also doing some research work for us. We've been approached by others. We've also been approached by a private firm who received grant funding for a project that's being done that will, of course, benefit us. Your RELs are a great source of assistance for you. And then there's apps challenges, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. The apps challenges help to harness the ideas of people outside of education, and we've had a lot of luck, too, with the barter system. We have maybe one agency has a grant, and another agency has a resource that the first agency needs, and so there's a nice little trade-off going on there. We're doing that. That's how we are actually, that's half of our sustainability for the next 3 years is an agency with a workforce grant who needs us to do some research. So what is an apps challenge? Ours was called Apps for VA. It's up there on your screen. First, we exposed some aggregate self-suppressed data on our website. It can be downloaded by anyone, but we had 3 events. The first event was Startup Weekend EDU, and we brought together developers and entrepreneurs from a Friday night until Sunday night at a really great site that was hosted by Microsoft. The developers and entrepreneurs formed teams to work on building startup companies that address education problems using education data. Next, we held 4 simultaneous hackathons from a Friday night to a Saturday night. Once again, the challenge was for developers to develop an app using our data. There's in Arlington County, Virginia, they're using a Kaggle.com contest to bring together developers from around the world to explore the dropout problem. And in New York City, an apps challenge is in place to help students decide which schools they want to attend. And finally, this was totally unexpected. A professor at James Madison University actually adopted Apps for Virginia as the topic of his semester-long computer science course. Students have to develop a database and an application with our data. This semester, we have over 80 students in 3 sections working on education problems with our data. And those students are much closer to high school than we are. So their apps are really, really very student-focused and extremely creative. So I think it really helps to reach out to the community while we wear blinders of sorts when it comes to our data, and reaching out just helps us harness the creativity of thousands of minds, and it raises awareness of the availability of your data. So how can we support our schools? We found a way to work, the best way to work with our schools is to ask them to help us solve a problem, particularly when we're making burdensome changes to a data collection. It helps them feel some ownership. I mentioned the statewide needs assessment we're doing. We also set aside $2 million of our grant money to make competitive grants to school districts to improve their data systems. We have an Investing in Data Quality training program that has 4 levels that school district personnel can achieve. And then after each level is achieved, they receive a pin and they get their name on a wall of fame on our website. We've also developed some applications that districts can use throughout the year to check their data quality. That way they have fewer or no errors when it comes time to submit data. We've developed a number of meaningful reports that our districts can use internally, and we also give them self-suppressed versions for use with the public. We can give them back their data in files or web services. We work with their vendors to provide them with data using web services, and all of that saves them a lot of time from loading data. And then finally, as I mentioned, we provide support for interoperability by providing unrestricted licenses for SIF-enabled products. So I will leave you with some things that are on my radar right now. Citizen concerns and speculation on what data we collect and what we report to the federal government. Those concerns are on the rise. With incidents like the Target store data loss, there are concerns about security that are increasing. I found bills in the Virginia and Indiana legislatures and probably others that forbid the state to provide student-level information to the federal government. To address concerns, in Virginia, we've developed a video to explain in layman's terms the data we don't collect and how it's protected. I'm not seeing it in K-12 yet, but big data and predictive analytics are really being talked about in higher education. Big data, much bigger than what the SLDS is, capturing a lot of data as students move through a semester. We have citizens who want to manage our data. We see that particularly in the healthcare world, and our Henrico County student is a very good example of that. Context-aware computing is something to think about. It's like on Amazon when you get the little message that says, customers who viewed this also viewed this. That could be coming to our world soon. Cross-domain interoperability, that's agencies sharing across sectors is a reality, and it will grow. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with the SMAC stack. That's social media, mobile computing, analytics, and cloud. And that's happening right now, so it should be on your radar too. I'm going to turn it over to John now, and it's really been nice sharing with you, and thank you very much for having me.
Bethann, before John starts, let me introduce him. This is Vicki Dimmock again. John is the Deputy Director of the Southeast Regional Educational Laboratory, and he's also the Associate Director for the Florida Center for Reading Research. He has conducted research and program evaluations at all levels of the educational system. He's been an education analysis for the Florida Legislature, program manager for Florida's early learning programs, and he has been the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research at the Florida College System. He was the contract manager for Florida's new college placement test and oversaw the implementation of an early college readiness testing program while serving in the Florida college system. Currently, his current work is primarily focused on K through 12, helping states to better utilize their data systems to inform decision making. He holds a Ph.D. in political science from the University of Florida. And so welcome, John, and he's going to share with us some resources that are available from the Regional Educational Laboratory Southeast, and then after that we'll entertain questions and have some discussion. John?
Thank you, Vicki, and everybody. So one of the keys to the SLDS concept is that it becomes valuable when it gets into the hands of decision makers and policy makers. But for the first few years of any SLDS project, it's mostly in the hands of the people who kind of understand data systems and build them. And so, looking at the landscape, and given my experience within the state agencies here in Florida, one of the things that we've been thinking about in the REL Southeast is how can we help get people who may not be familiar with an SLDS, but are really the targets for the use of an SLDS to become familiar with it and to begin thinking about how they could utilize it. So a lot of the folks on the line here have been living and breathing SLDSs for a number of years, but the policymakers maybe that they work with, or some of you, in fact, may be policymakers, this is something that may be relatively new and different, and you may be wondering, well, how is this different from the data that I'm already used to? Most folks are, for example, if you've worked at a district or a state agency, you're familiar with normal sort of administrative data systems that are within inside of one sector, for example. So what we did at the REL Southeast was we put together a couple workshops that were really designed to help policymakers and decision makers think about an SLDS and how they might be able to use it to begin answering questions that are policy relevant. So the first workshop really explores why there's been so much emphasis on an SLDS, why the federal government was willing to invest, hundreds of millions of dollars into this, why the DQC put so much emphasis about getting this started. It explores sort of the origin and history of SLDSs, and then it moves into some of the sort of common uses of SLDS, what are some of the data that they have, and that then leads into sort of a discussion of limitations, and then finally we sort of wrap up with data governance from the perspective primarily of an SCA. What might it look like within your SCA to understand how to access and leverage the work around your SLDS? The second workshop really moves into the realm of research, where we begin helping policymakers think about what are the kinds of questions that maybe I couldn't have answered previously, but will now be able to answer given that my state has completed its SLDS. So we think about the kinds of research design, longitudinal designs that become available. We also, of course, talk about some of the kinds of things that aren't available or aren't appropriate given the kinds of data that an SLDS typically collects. And then we sort of wrap up with a discussion about thinking about what kinds of specific research questions might you be able to ask, what would be the characteristics of good questions to ask of your SLDS. And again, both of these resources were designed for introducing people who are not the data folks within an agency, within a district, but are really the decision makers, the ones who typically do the data requests, so that they can begin thinking about what new things can they do with this system that they couldn't have done before, and what are some of maybe the key questions that they should be asking of their system so that they can take advantage of the investment that's been made in the development of these systems. There's links on the presentation to each of these workshops. They're basically roughly 20 to 25-minute recorded presentations, and then if you want more information, you can also get a summary of these from the download section on this webinar. So thank you, and I hope that some of you might find this useful or something that you would want to share with some of your colleagues maybe within your agencies.
Great, thanks, John and Bethann. Y'all did a great job, and I hope I've stimulated a lot of thought among participants.